Hi and welcome back to the course. As we've seen, REST was designed to be stateless and for applications to interact with things called resources. In this section, we're going to be creating a proper REST API that follows all of the principles. In order to do that, we're also going to introduce a new library. It is an extension to the Flask library that we've already used, and this extension is going to allow us to create REST APIs very easily. It is limiting in some sense of the word because it decreases the flexibility of Flask. However, it does that to make us adhere to the REST standard. And that is a good thing because we will make sure that our application follows what REST was designed to be. When other applications, such as mobile apps or web apps, interact with our API, it will be easy for the developers of those applications to understand how our API works. Flask-RESTful is what we're going to be installing, and as I said, that's an extension to Flask, and it just gives us a few goodies that we can use in our application. In this lecture, however, we're going to be setting up, so apologies for the sort of a bit more boring content this time around, but we have to do the setup at some point. In order to set up for this new project, I've just gone to a new folder. I've called it section 4, and you can see here, this is the path of the folder that I'm in. So it's just basically in my documents. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a virtual environment. A virtual environment essentially gives me a clean installation of Python. Here's pip 3.5. Remember that? We use that to install libraries in the last section, such as Flask. If you do pip 3.5 freeze, that is going to give you the libraries that you've got installed, such as Flask, and the versions that you've got these libraries on. For example, right now I've got Flask version 0.11.1, and so on with a bunch of other libraries. Most of these libraries are installed by Flask when you install Flask. As you can see, these libraries have specific version numbers. And last section, we created our application using this version of Flask. If we now create another application and Flask has been updated, for example, imagine it is now in version 0.12, we may go into pip 3.5 and update Flask to the latest version so we can get any bug fixes and any new features that they've implemented. But in doing so, we may break section 3's application if Flask has changed substantially. So updating isn't really the best option. Instead, what we want to do is to let the application in section 3 use 0.11.1, and we can create our new project using the newest version. In order to do that, we have to make sure that our projects don't share libraries. If we went ahead and just created a new project and ran it using Python 3.5, that would be using these libraries up here. So what we have to do is we have to get a clean installation of Python with no libraries at all and use that for this project. If we then go ahead and create a new project later on, we will also do a fresh installation of Python again, and so on and so on. However, fortunately, we don't have to download Python and reinstall it and so on every time. What we want to do is to use virtual environments. A virtual environment mimics reinstalling Python with no libraries. The first thing you want to do is do pip 3.5 install virtualenv. And in here, as you can see, I've already got this requirement satisfied, so it tells me that, but in your case, it will install virtualenv. And virtualenv is the tool that we're going to use to create these virtual environments. Once that's done, all we'll do is say virtualenv venv --python equal python 3.5. Now this is calling the virtualenv program that we've installed, and what's going to happen is it's going to create a folder inside our current folder, inside this section 4 folder that I'm in. It's going to create a folder called venv, and in it is going to put a fresh Python installation. And that fresh Python install is going to be Python 3.5. If you wanted to use Python 2.7, you may put Python 2.7 there, and so on. So just press enter at the end, and then it will install a few things that it needs. This is doing the Python install, and there it is, it's now finished. The next step is to do activate VM bin Python. Apologies, not activate. Source VM bin activate. There we go. Now, this will only work if you're on Mac or Linux. If you are on Windows, what you want to do is VM bin VM scripts activate.bat. This is what you want to run if you are on Windows, using the Windows command line. Okay, but for me, I'm going to do source VM bin activate, and notice how now my prompt is going to change, and it's going to show the bracket VM at first. This means that I am now using the virtual environment. Whenever I run Python, this is going to run Python 3.5, which is the sort of Python install that I've done. Notice how in the past, I had to run Python 3.5 to get this Python version. As long as I'm within the virtual environment, I just have to run Python to get the version that is installed in the virtual environment. Okay, so staying in the virtual environment is very easy. You just don't have to do anything. And if you ever want to leave the virtual environment and stop using the virtual environment, just do deactivate. Notice how now if I do python -- version, I go back to the system version, which is Python 2.7. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the virtual environment now and do pip install Flask-RESTful. Okay, so what is going to happen now is that I am in the virtual environment and I'm going to install this library that is required. Notice how installing this library will also install Flask. So you don't have to do that separately if you don't want, but you can install Flask separately if you prefer, just by doing pip install Flask. Okay, now we can do pip freeze, and this will tell us what we've got installed. And as you can see, we've got a bunch of things, including Flask, the same version as before. The version hasn't changed yet, but it might in the future. And we've also got a thing called Flask-RESTful. Now, Flask-RESTful is what's going to allow us to very easily create REST APIs. So that's us all set up, setting up the virtual environment and installing Flask-RESTful. And in the very next video, we're going to talk about how to use Flask-RESTful to create our API. I'll see you there.